If you've encountered a major shock in your life, as many of us have, it just might have led you to look a little more deeply into what led to that pain or disappointment, betrayal, or loss. Your expectations could have been compromised. What you had been led to be safe was not. Maybe your perceptions were not to blame. Maybe your decisions were based on patterns or rules or laws that were flawed. Neuroscience is showing us more and more that things happen, and then afterwards we bend those outcomes to fit our narratives and identities. The human mechanism is a blaming monster that tries to be smart. We try to fit our observations into some cause and effect storyline. As long as we and everyone else are playing the same game, that is, have the same pattern and rules running, those may be fairly predictable and safe. But nature always interrupts and exposes, it surprises, and quite honestly, many of us are looking for those exceptions, but we keep those from each other in our quiet secrets and fantasies. I'm Roach, Mark Roach, here to provoke you to examine yourself and life, to look at things from a different perspective than you may have been led. Let's review the work of P.D. Ouspensky, Chapter 7, In Search of the Miraculous. Before I start quoting from Ouspensky, let me give you some highlights first. In this work, Ouspensky speaks as to how to crack the code of your nature, how to observe yourself and understand why you really don't do what you intend to do. He speaks to the difficulty of observing yourself objectively. He also explains how our nature is so naturally aligned with music and mathematics that ancient knowledge of these patterns observed in octaves are mirrored in nature. The interval between observations, between the notes, between the observations are not equal. And therefore there's a pattern that you can watch that will expose some natural occurrences in nature. So you may be able to plan or expect or shock yourself even, or not be surprised when you're shocked, to anticipate. And if you learn to trust yourself more fully, then you can learn how to feel and develop the perceptions to navigate life better. Let's explore. On one occasion, while talking with Gurdjieff, I asked him whether he considered it possible to attain cosmic consciousness, not for a brief moment only, but for a longer period. I understood the expression cosmic consciousness in the sense of higher consciousness possible for man in the sense in which I had previously written about it in my book, Tertium Organum. I do not know what you call cosmic consciousness, said Gurdjieff. It is a vague and indefinite term. Anyone can call anything he likes by it. In most cases, what is called cosmic consciousness is simply fantasy, associative daydreaming connected with intensified work of the emotional center. Sometimes it comes near to ecstasy, but most often it is merely subjective emotional experience on the level of dreams. But even apart from all this, before we can speak of cosmic consciousness, we must define in general what consciousness is. So how do you define consciousness? Consciousness is considered to be indefinable, Ouspensky said. And indeed, how can it be defined if it is an inner quality with the ordinary means at our disposal? It is impossible to prove the presence of consciousness in another man. We know it only in ourselves. All this is rubbish, said Gurdjieff, the usual scientific sophistry. It is time you got rid of it. Only one thing is true in what you have said, that you can know consciousness only in yourself. Observe that I say that you can know, for you can know it only when you have it. And when you have not got it, you can know that you have not got it. Not that at that very moment, but afterwards. I mean that when it comes again, you see that it has been absent a long time, and you can find and remember the moment when it disappeared and when it reappeared. You can also define the moments when you are nearer to consciousness and further away from consciousness. But by observing in yourself the appearance and disappearance of consciousness, you will inevitably see one fact, which is you neither see nor acknowledge now. And that is that moments of consciousness are very short and are separated by long intervals of completely unconscious mechanical working of the machine. You will then see that you can think, feel, act, speak, work without being conscious of it. And if you learn to see in yourself the moments of consciousness and the long periods of mechanicalness, you will infallibly see in other people when they are conscious of what they are doing and when they are not. Your principal mistake consists in thinking that you always have consciousness. And in general, either that consciousness is always present or that it is never present. In reality, consciousness is a property which is continually changing. Now it is present, now it is not present. And there are different degrees and different levels of consciousness. Both consciousness and the different degrees of consciousness must be understood in oneself by sensation, by taste. No definitions can help you in this case, and no definitions are possible so long as you do not understand what you have to define. And science and philosophy cannot define consciousness because they want to define where it does not exist. It is necessary to distinguish consciousness from the possibility of consciousness. We have only the possibility of consciousness and rare flashes of it. Therefore, we cannot define what consciousness is. I cannot say what was said about consciousness became clear to me at once, but once the subsequent talks explained to me the principles on which these arguments were based. On one occasion at the beginning of a meeting with Gurdjieff, put a question to all those present to answer in turn. The question was, what is the most important thing that we notice during self-observation? Some of those present said that during attempts at self-observation, what they had felt particularly strongly was an incessant flow of thoughts, which they found impossible to stop. Others spoke of the difficulty of distinguishing the work of one center from the work of another. I had evidently not altogether understood the question, or I answered my own thoughts, because I said that what struck me most was the connectedness of one thing with another in the system, the wholeness of the system as if it were an organism, and the entirely new significance of the word, to which included not only the idea of knowing this or thing or that, but the connection between this thing and everything else. Gurdjieff was obviously dissatisfied with our replies. I had already begun to understand him in such circumstances, and I saw that he expected from us indications of something definite that we had either missed or failed to understand. Not one of you has noticed the most important thing that I have pointed out to you, he said. That is to say, not one of you has noticed that you do not remember yourselves. And he gave particular emphasis to these words. You do not feel yourselves. You are not conscious with yourselves. With you, it observes. Just as it speaks, it thinks, it laughs. You do not feel. I observe, I notice, I see. Everything is still noticed, is seen. In order to really observe oneself, one must first of all remember oneself. He again emphasized these words. Try to remember yourselves when you observe yourselves, and later on tell me the results. Only those results will have any value that are accompanied by self-remembering. Otherwise, you yourselves do not exist in your observations. In which case, what are all of your observations worth? These words of Gurdjieff's made me think a great deal. It seemed to me that once that they were the key to what he had said before about consciousness. But I decided to draw no conclusions whatever, but to try to remember myself while observing myself. The very first attempt showed me how difficult it was. Attempts at self-remembering failed to give any results except to show me that in actual fact, we never remember ourselves. What else do you want? Said Gurdjieff. This is a very important realization. People who know this, he emphasized these words, already know a great deal. The whole trouble is that nobody knows it. If you ask a man whether he can remember himself, he will of course answer that he can. If you tell him that he cannot remember himself, he will be angry with you, or he will think you an utter fool. The whole of life is based on this, the whole of human existence, the whole of human blindness. If a man really knows that he cannot remember himself, he is already nearer to the understanding of his being. All that Gurdjieff said, all that I myself thought, and especially all that my attempts at self-remembering had shown me, very soon convinced me that I was faced with an entirely new problem, which science and philosophy had not, so far, come across. But before making deductions, I will try to describe my attempts to remember myself. The first impression was that attempts to remember myself, or to be conscious of myself, to say to myself, I am walking, I am doing, and continuing to feel this, I stopped thought. When I was feeling, I could not neither speak or think. Even sensations became dimmed. Also, one could only remember oneself in this way for a very short time. I had previously made certain experiments in stopping thought, which are mentioned in books on yoga practices. For example, there is such a description in Edward Carpenter's book From Adam Peak to Elephantah, although it is a very general one. And my first attempt to self-remember reminded me exactly of these, my first experiments. Actually, it was almost the same thing, with the one difference that in stopping thoughts, attention is wholly directed towards the effort of not admitting thoughts. While in self-remembering, attention becomes divided. One part of it is directed towards the same effort, and the other part to the feeling of self. The last realization enabled me to come to a certain, possibly a very incomplete definition of self-remembrance, which is nevertheless provided to be useful in practice. I'm speaking of the division of attention, which is the characteristic feature of self-remembering. I represented it to myself in the following way. When I observe something, my attention is directed towards what I observe. A line like with one arrowhead pointing towards the external phenomenon, away from myself to what I observe. When at the same time I try to remember myself, my attention is directed both towards the object observed and toward myself. A second arrowhead appears on this line back towards myself. Having defined this, I saw the problem consisting in directing attention on oneself without weakening or obliterating the attention directed on something else. Moreover, this something else could well be within me as outside me. The very first attempts at such a division of attention showed me its possibility. At the same time, I saw two things clearly. In the first place, I saw that self-remembering resulting from this method had nothing in common with self-feeling or self-analysis. It was a new and very interesting state with a strangely familiar flavor. And secondly, I realized that moments of self-remembering do occur in life, although rarely. Only the deliberate production of these moments created the sensation of novelty. Actually, I had been familiar with them from early childhood. They came either in new and unexpected surroundings, in a new place, among new people, while traveling, for instance, when suddenly one looks about and one says, "How strange, I am in this place?" Or in a very emotional moment, in moments of danger, in moments when it is necessary to keep one's head, when one hears one's voice and sees and observes oneself from the outside. I saw quite clearly that my first recollections of life, in my own case, very early ones, were moments of self-remembering. This last realization revealed much else to me. That is, I saw that I really only remember those moments of the past in which I remembered myself. Of the others, I know only that they took place. I am not able to wholly revive them, to experience them again. But the moments when I had remembered myself were alive and were in no way different from the present. I was still afraid to come to conclusions, but I already saw that I stood upon the threshold of a very great discovery. I had always been astonished at the weakness and insufficiency of our memory. So many things disappear. For some reason or the other, the chief absurdity of life for me consisted in this. Why experience so much in order to forget it afterwards? Besides, there was something degrading in this. A man feels something in which it seems to him to be very big. He thinks he will never forget it. 1 or 2 years pass by and nothing remains of it. It now became clear to me why this was so and why it could not be otherwise. If our memory really keeps alive only moments of self-remembering, it is clear why our memory is so poor. All these were the realizations of the first days. Later, when I began to learn and divide attention, I saw that self-remembering gave wonderful sensations which, in a natural way, that is, by themselves, come to us only very seldom and in exceptional circumstances and conditions. Thus, for instance, at what time I used to much like to wander through St. Petersburg at night and to sense the houses and the streets. St. Petersburg is full of these strange sensations. Houses, especially old houses, were quite alive. I all but spoke to them. There was no imagination in it. I did not think of anything. I simply walked along trying to observe, to remember myself and look at the sensations, and they came by themselves. Later on, I was to discover many unexpected things in the same way, but I will speak of this further on. Sometimes self-remembering was not successful. As other times, it was accompanied by curious observations. I was once walking along the litany towards the Nevsky, and in spite of all my efforts, I was unable to keep my attention on self-remembering. The noise, movement, and everything distracted me. Every minute I lost the thread of attention, found it again, and then lost it again. At last I felt a kind of ridiculous irritation with myself, and I turned into the street on the left, having firmly decided to keep my attention on the fact that I would remember myself at least for some time, at any rate until I reached the following street. I reached the Nadezhevsky without losing a thread of attention, except perhaps for short moments. And then I turned towards the Nevsky, realizing that in quiet streets, it was easier for me not to lose a line of thought, and wishing therefore to test myself in more noisy streets. I reached the Nevsky, still remembering myself, and was already beginning to experience the strange emotional state of inner peace and confidence which one comes to after great efforts of this kind. Just around the corner on the Nevsky was the tobacconist's shop where they made my cigarettes. Still remembering myself, I thought I would call there and order some cigarettes. 2 hours later, I woke up in the Tverskaya, that is, far away, and I was going by Iskavik to the printers. The sensation of awakening was extraordinarily vivid. I can almost say that I came to. I remember everything at once. How I had been walking along the Neodeskaya, how I had been remembering myself, how I thought about the cigarettes, and how at this thought, I seemed all at once to fall and disappear into a deep sleep. At the same time, while immersed in this sleep, I continued to perform consistent and expedient actions. I left the tobacconist, called at my hat in the litany, telephoned to the printers. I wrote 2 letters. Then again, I went out of the house. I walked on the left side to the Nevsky up to the Gustavsky Dior, intending to go to the office Geiger. Then I had changed my mind as it was getting late. I had taken an Iskavik and was driving to the Kavalskar to my printers. And on the way, driving along the Tverskaya, I began to feel a strange uneasiness, as though I had forgotten something. And suddenly I remembered that I had forgotten to remember myself. I spoke of my observations and deductions to the people in our group, as well to my various literary friends and others. I told them that this was the center of gravity of the whole system, and that all the work on oneself, that now work on oneself was not only empty words, but a real fact full of significant thanks, to which psychology became an exact and at the same time a practical science. I said that Eastern and Western psychology in general had overlooked a fact of tremendous importance, namely that we do not remember ourselves, that we live and act and reason in deep sleep, not metaphorically, but in an absolute reality. And also at the same time, we can remember ourselves if we can make sufficient efforts that we can awaken. I was struck by the difference between the understanding of the people who belong to our groups and that of people outside of them. The people who belonged to our groups understood, though not all at once, that we had come into contact with a miracle, and that it was something new, something that had never existed anywhere before. And other people did not understand this. They took it all too lightly, and sometimes they even began to prove to me that such theories had existed before. A.L. Volinsky, who I often met, and with whom I had a great deal of talking with since 1909, and whose opinions I valued very much, did not find the idea of self-remembering anything that he had not known before. This is an apperception, he said to me. Have you read Once Logic? You will find there his latest definition of apperception. It is exactly the same thing that you speak of. Simple observation is perception. Observation with self-remembering, as you call it, is apperception. Of course, Wundt knew of it. I did not want to argue with Volinsky. I had read Wundt. And of course, what Wundt had written was not at all what I had to say to Volinsky. Wundt had come close to this idea, but others had come just as close and had afterwards gone off in a different direction. We had not seen the magnitude of the idea, which was hidden behind his thoughts about different forms of perception. And having seen the magnitude of the idea, he, of course, could not see the central position which the idea of the absence of consciousness had led to the possibility of the voluntary creation of this consciousness ought to occupy in our thinking. Only it seemed strange to me that Volinsky could not see this event when I pointed it out to him. I subsequently became convinced that this idea was hidden by an impenetrable veil from many otherwise significant, intelligent people. And still later on, I saw why this was so. The next time Gurdjieff came from Moscow, he found us immersed in experiments in self-remembering and in discussions about these experiments. But at his first lecture, he spoke of something else. In right knowledge, the study of man must proceed on a parallel line with the study of the world, and the study of the world must run parallel with the study of man. Laws are everywhere the same, in the world as well as in man. Having mastered the principles in any one law, we must look for its manifestation in the world and in man simultaneously. Moreover, some laws are more easily observed in the world. Others are more easily observed in man. Therefore, in certain cases, it is better to begin with the world and then to pass it on to man. And in other cases, it's better to begin with man and then to pass it on to the world. This parallel study of the world and of man shows the student the fundamental unity of everything and helps him to find analogies and phenomena of different orders. The number of fundamental laws which govern all processes both in the world and in man is very small. Different numerical combinations of a few elementary forces create all the seeming variety of phenomena. In order to understand the mechanics of the universe, it is necessary to resolve the complex phenomena into these elementary forces. The first fundamental law of the universe is the law of three forces or three principles, or, as it is often called, the law of three. According to this law, every action, every phenomenon in all worlds, without exception, is a result of simultaneous action of three forces: the positive, the negative, and the neutralizing. Of this we have already spoken, and in future we will return to this law with every new line of study. The next fundamental law of the universe is the law of seven, or the law of octaves. In order to understand the meaning of this law, it is necessary to regard the universe as consisting of vibrations. These vibrations proceed in all kinds, aspects, and densities of the matter which constitutes the universe. From the finest to the coarsest, they issue from various sources and proceed in various directions, crossing one another, colliding, strengthening, weakening, arresting one another, and so on. In this connection, according to the usual views accepted in the West, vibrations are continuous. This means that vibrations are usually regarded as proceeding uninterruptedly, ascending or descending, so long as there continues to act the force of the original impulse, which causes the vibration and which overcomes the resistance of the medium in which the vibrations proceed. When the force of the impulse becomes exhausted and the resistance of the medium gains the upper hand, the vibrations naturally die down and stop. But until this moment is reached, that is, until the beginning of the natural weakening, the vibrations develop uniformly and gradually, and in the absence of resistance, can even be endless. So that one of the fundamental propositions of our physics in the continuity of vibrations, although this has never been precisely formulated because it has never been opposed, in certain of the newest theories, this proposition is beginning to be shaken. Nevertheless, physics is still very far from a correct view on the nature of vibrations, or what corresponds to our conception of vibrations in the real world. In this instance, the view of ancient knowledge is opposed to that of contemporary science. Because of the base of the understanding of vibrations, ancient knowledge places the principle of discontinuity of vibrations. The principle of the discontinuity of vibrations means that the definite and necessary characteristics of all vibrations in nature, whether ascending or descending, to develop non-uniformly, but with periodical accelerations and retardations. This principle can be formulated still more precisely if we say that the force of the original impulse in vibrations does not act uniformly, but, as it were, becomes alternatively stronger and weaker. The force of the impulse acts without changing its nature, and vibrations develop in a regular way, only for certain time, which is determined by the nature of the impulse, the medium, the conditions, and so forth. But at a certain moment, a kind of change takes place in it, and the vibrations, so to speak, cease to obey it. And they, for a short time, they slow down and to a certain extent change their nature or direction. For example, ascending vibrations at a certain moment begin to ascend more slowly, and descending vibrations begin to descend more slowly. After this temporary retardation, both in ascending and descending, the vibrations again enter the former channel, and for a certain time ascend or descend uniformly up to a certain moment, when a check in their development again takes place. In this connection, it is significant that the periods of uniform action of the momentum are not equal, and that the moments of retardation of the vibrations are not symmetrical. One period is shorter, the other is longer. In order to determine these moments of retardation, or rather the checks in the ascent and descent of vibrations, the lines of development of vibrations are divided into periods corresponding to the doubling or halving of the number of vibrations in a given space of time. Let us imagine a line of increasing vibrations. Let us take them at the moment when they are vibrating at the rate of, say, 1,000 a second. After a certain time, the number of vibrations is doubled. It reaches 2,000. It has been found and established in that this interval of vibrations between the given number of vibrations and a number twice as large, there are two places where the retardation in the increase of vibrations take place. One is near the beginning, but not at the beginning of itself. The other occurs almost at the end. The laws which govern the retardation or deflection of vibrations from their primary direction were known to ancient science. These laws were duly incorporated into particular formula or diagrams which had been preserved up into our times. In this formula, the period in which vibrations are doubled was divided into 8 unequal steps according to the rate of increase in the vibrations. The 8th step represents the first step would double the number of vibrations. The period of the doubling of the vibrations, or the line of development of the vibrations, being given a number of vibrations and double that number, is called an octave. That is to say, composed of 8. The principle of dividing into 8 unequal parts of the period in which the vibrations are doubled, is based on the observation of the non-uniform increase in vibrations in the entire octave, and separate steps of the octave show acceleration and retardation at different moments of its development. In the guise of this formula, ideas of the octave have been handed down from teacher to pupil, from one school to another. In very remote times, one of these schools found that it was possible to apply this formula to music. In this way was obtained the 7-tone musical scale, which was known to most distant antiquity, then forgotten, and then discovered or found again. The 7-tone scale is the formula of a cosmic law, which was worked out by ancient schools and applied to music. At the same time, however, if we study the vibrations of other kinds, we shall see that the laws are everywhere the same, and that light, heat, chemical, magnetic, and other vibrations are subject to the same laws as sound vibrations. For instance, the light scale is known to physics. In chemistry, the periodic system of the elements is without doubt closely connected to the principle of octaves, although this connection is still not fully clear to science. A study of the structure of the 7-tone musical scale gives a very good foundation for understanding the cosmic law of octaves. Let us again take the ascending octave, that is, the octave in which the frequency of vibrations increase. Let us suppose that this octave begins with 1,000 vibrations a second. Let us designate these 1,000 vibrations by the note Do. Vibrations are growing, that is, their frequency is increasing. At the point that they reach 2,000 vibrations a second, there will be a second Do, and that is the Do of the next octave. The period between one Do and the next is an octave, and it's divided into 7 unequal parts because the frequency of vibrations does not increase uniformly. And I'm going to admit some of the technical explanation here. This is where a lot of people get hung up in details, and I'll come back to this with some diagrams and illustrations in simpler terms in another video. Back to Ouspensky now. If we grasp its full meaning, the law of octaves gives us an entirely new explanation of the whole of life, of the progress and development of phenomena on all planes of the universe observed by us. This law explains why there are no straight lines in nature, and why we can neither think nor do, why everything with us is thought, why everything happens with us, and happens usually in a way opposed to what we want or expect. All this is the clear and direct effect of the intervals or retardation in the development of vibrations. What precisely does happen at the moment of the retardation of vibrations? A deviation from the original direction takes place. The octave begins in one direction, But a deviation takes place between mi and fa. The line begun at do changes its direction, and through fa, sol, la, and si, it descends at an angle to its original direction, shown by the first three notes. Between si and do, the second interval occurs, a fresh deviation, a further change in direction. The next octave gives an even more marked deviation. The one following that, a deviation that is more marked still, so that the line of octaves may turn at last completely around and proceed in a direction opposite the original direction. In developing further, the line of octaves, or the line of development of vibrations, may return to the original direction. In other words, make a complete circle. This law shows why straight lines never occur in our activities. Why, having begun to do one thing, we in fact constantly do something entirely different, often the opposite of the first. Although we do not notice this and continue to think that we are doing the same thing that we began to do. All this and many other things can only be explained with the help of the law of octaves, together with an understanding of the role and significance of the intervals, which cause the line of development of force constantly to change, to go in a broken line, to turn around, to become its own opposite, and so on. Such a course of things, that is a change of direction, we can observe in everything. After a certain period of energetic activity or strong emotion, or a right understanding, a reaction comes. Work becomes tedious and tiring. Moments of fatigue and indifference enter into feeling. Instead of right thinking, a search for compromises begins. Suppression, evasion to difficult problems. But the lines continue to develop, though now not on the same direction as the beginning. Work becomes mechanical. Feeling becomes weaker and weaker. Descends to the level of the common events of the day. Thought becomes dogmatic, literal. Everything proceeds in this way for a certain time. Then again, there is a reaction. Again, a stop. Again, a deviation. The development of the force may continue, but the work which was begun with great zeal and enthusiasm has become an obligatory and useless formality. A number of entirely foreign elements have entered into feeling, considering vexation, irritation, hostility. Thought goes round in a circle, repeating what was known before, and the way out it had become and been found becomes more and more lost. The same thing happens in all spheres of human activity, in literature, science, art, philosophy, religion, in individual, and above all in social and political life. We can observe how the line of development of forces deviates from its original direction and goes after a certain time in a diametrically opposed direction, still preserving its former name. A study of history from this point of view shows the most astonishing facts which mechanical humanity is far from desiring to notice. Perhaps the most interesting examples of such change of direction in the line of development of forces can be found in the history of religion, particularly in the history of Christianity, if it is studied dispassionately. Think of how many turns the lines of development of forces must have come from the gospel preaching of love to the Inquisitions, or to go from the ascetics of the early centuries studying esoteric Christianity to the scholastics who calculated how many angels could be placed on the point of a needle. The law of octaves explains why many phenomena of our lives are incomprehensible. First is the principle of the deviation of forces. Second is the fact that nothing in the world stays in the same place or remains what it was. Everything moves, everything is going somewhere, is changing, and inevitably either develops or goes down, weakens or degenerates. That is to say, it moves along either ascending or descending a line of octaves. And third, that in the actual development of itself, both ascending and descending octaves, fluctuations, rises, and falls are constantly taking place. We have spoken so far chiefly about the discontinuity of vibrations and how the deviation of forces. But we must now clearly grasp two other principles: the inevitability or either ascent or descent in every line of development of forces, and also in the periodic fluctuations, that is, rises and falls in every line, whether ascending or descending. Nothing can develop by staying in one level. Ascent or descent is the inevitable cosmic condition of any action. We neither understand nor see what is going on around and within us, either because we do not allow for the inevitability of our descent when there is no ascent, or because we take descent to be ascent. These are two of the fundamental causes of our self-deception. We do not see the first one because we continually think that things can remain for a long time at the same level. And we do not see the second because ascents where we see them are in fact impossible. As impossible as it is to increase consciousness by mechanical means. Having learned to distinguish ascending and descending octaves in life, we learn to distinguish ascent and descent within the octaves themselves. Whatever sphere of life, we can see that nothing can ever remain level and constant. Everything, everywhere, and in everything precedes the swing of a pendulum. Everywhere and in everything, the waves rise and fall. Our energy in one or another direction, which suddenly increases and afterwards just suddenly weakens. Our moods, which become better or become worse without any visible reason. Our feelings, our desires, our intention, our decisions, all from time to time pass through periods of ascent or descent, become stronger or weaker. And there are perhaps 100 pendulums moving here and there in man. These ascents and descents, these wave-like fluctuations of mood, thought, feelings, energy, determination, are periods of development of forces between intervals, in the octaves as well as the intervals themselves. Upon the law of octaves in its three principal manifestations depend many phenomena, both of a psychic nature as well as those immediately connected with our life. Upon the law of octaves depends the imperfection and incompleteness of our knowledge in all spheres without exception, chiefly because we always begin in one direction and afterwards, without noticing it, proceed in another. As has been said already, the law of octaves in all its manifestation was known to ancient knowledge. Even our division of time, that is, the days and week into work days and Sunday, is connected with the same properties and interconnection of our activity which depend upon the general law. The biblical myth and the creation of the world in 6 days and seventh day in which God rested from his labors is also expression of the law of octaves, or is an indication of it, although an incomplete one. Observations based on understanding of the law of octaves show that the vibrations may develop in different ways. In interrupted octaves, they merely begin and fall, are drowned or swallowed up by the other. Stronger vibrations, which intersect them or which go in an opposite direction. In octaves which deviate from the original direction, the vibrations change their nature and give results opposite to those which might have been expected at the beginning. And it is only in octaves of a cosmic order, both descending and ascending, that vibrations develop in consecutive and orderly way. following the same direction in which they started. Further observations showed that the right and consistent development of octaves, although rare, can be observed in all the occasions of life and in the activity of nature and even in human activity. The right development of these octaves is based on what looks an accident. It sometimes happens that octaves going parallel to the given octave, intersecting or meeting in some way or another, fill up its intervals and make it possible for the vibrations of the given octave to develop in freedom and without checks. Observation of such rightly developing octaves establishes the fact that if at the necessary moment, that is, at the moment when the given octave passes through an interval, there enters into it an additional shock, which corresponds in force and character. It will develop further without hindrance along the original direction, neither losing anything nor changing its nature. In such cases, there is an essential difference between ascending and descending octaves. In an ascending octave, the first interval becomes the mi and fa. If corresponding additional energy enters at this point, the octave will develop without hindrance to si. But between si and do, it needs much stronger additional shock for its right development than between mi and fa, because the vibrations of the octave at this point are considerably higher pitch, and to overcome a check in the development of the octave, a greater intensity is needed. In a descending octave, on the other hand, the greatest interval occurs at the very beginning of the octave, immediately after the first do, and the material for filling it is very often found either in do itself or in the lateral vibrations evoked by do. For this reason, a descending octave develops much more easily than an ascending octave, and in passing beyond si, it reaches fa without hindrance. Here, an additional shock is necessary, though considerably less strong than the first shock between do and si. In the big cosmic octave, which reaches us in the form of the ray of creation, we can see the first complete example of the law of octaves. The ray of creation begins with the absolute. The absolute is the all. The all, possessing full unity, full will, and full consciousness, creates worlds within itself. In this way, beginning the descending world octave. The absolute is the do of this octave. The worlds which the absolute creates in itself are si. The interval between do and si in this case is filled by the will of the absolute. The process of creation is developed further by the force of the original impulse and an additional shock. Si passes into law, which for us in our star world is the Milky Way. Law passes into Sol, our sun, the solar system, and Sol passes into Fa, the planetary world. And here between the planetary world as a whole and our Earth occurs an interval. This means that the planetary radiations carry various influences to the Earth and are not able to reach it, or so to speak more correctly, they are not received. The Earth reflects them. In order to fill the interval at this point, the ray of creation, a special apparatus is created for receiving and transmitting the influences coming from planets. The apparatus is organic life on Earth. Organic life transmits to the Earth all the influences intended for it and makes possible the further development and growth of the Earth, me, of the cosmic octave, and then the moon, or ray, after which follows another do. Nothing between all and nothing passes the ray of creation. You know the prayer, Holy God, holy the firm, holy the immortal? This prayer comes from ancient knowledge. Holy God means the absolute or all. Holy the firm also means absolute or nothing. Holy the immortal signifies that which is between them. That is the 6 notes of the array of creation with organic life. All 3 taken together make one. This is the coexistent and indivisible Trinity. We must now develop on the idea of the additional shocks which make it possible for the lines of force to reach the projected aim. As I said before, shocks may occur accidentally. Accident is, of course, a very uncertain thing, but those lines of development of forces which are straightened out by accident and which man can sometimes see or suppose or expect create in him, more than anything else, the illusion of straight lines. That is to say, he thinks that straight lines are the rule and broken and interrupted lines the exception. This in turn creates in him the illusion that it is possible to do, possible to attain a projected aim. In reality, man can do nothing. If by accident his activity gives a result, even though it resembles only in appearance or in name the original aim, a man assures himself and others that he has attained the aim which he set out before himself, and that anyone else would also be able to attain it as his aim, and others believe him. In reality, this is an illusion. A man can win at roulette, but this would be an accident. Attaining an aim which one has set before oneself in life or any particular sphere of human activity is just the same type of accident. The only difference is that in regard to a roulette, a man at least knows for certain whether he has lost or won on each separate occasion, that is, on each separate stake. But in the activities of his life, particularly when activities of the kind that when many people are concerned in and when years pass between the beginning of something and its result, a man can very easily deceive himself and take the result obtained as the result desired. That is, believe that he has won when on the whole he has lost. The greatest insult for a man-machine is to tell him that he can do nothing, can attain nothing, that he can never move towards any aim, whatever. And in that striving towards one, he will inevitably create another. Actually, of course, it cannot be otherwise. The man-machine is in the power of accident. His activities may fall by accidentally into some sort of channel which has been created by cosmic or mechanical forces, and they may by accident be moving along this channel for a certain time, giving the illusion that aims of some sort are kind of being attained. Such accidental correspondence of results with the aims we have set before us, or the attainment of aims in small things, which can have no consequence, creates in mechanical man the conviction that he is able to attain any aim, is able to conquer nature, as it is called, is able to arrange the whole of his life, and so on. As a matter of fact, he is, of course, unable to do anything of the kind because not only has he no control over things outside of himself, but he has no control even over things within himself. The last must be very clearly understood and assimilated. At the same time, it must be understood that control over things begins with control over things in ourselves, with control over ourselves. A man who cannot control himself or the course of things within himself can control nothing. In what way can control be attained? The technical part of this is explained by the law of octaves. Octaves can develop consecutively and continuously in the desired direction if additional shocks enter them at the moments necessary, that is, at the moments when vibrations slow down. If additional shocks do not enter the necessary moments, octaves change their direction. To entertain hopes of accidental shocks coming from somewhere by themselves at the moments necessary is, of course, out of the question. These remain for a man the choice of things, finding direction for his activities, which corresponds to the mechanical line of events of a given moment. In other words, of going where the wind blows or swimming with the stream, even if this contradicts his inner inclinations, convictions, and sympathies, or reconciling himself to the failure of everything he starts out to do. Or he can learn to recognize these moments of intervals in all lines of his activity and learn to create the additional shocks. In other words, learn to apply to his own activities the method which cosmic forces make use of in creating additional shocks at the necessary moments. The possibility of artificial, that is, specially created additional shocks gives a practical meaning to the study of the law of octaves and makes the study obligatory and necessary if a man desires to step out of the role of passive spectator of that which is happening to him and around him. The man-machine can do nothing. To him and still around him, everything happens. In order to do it is necessary to know the law of octaves, to know the moments of intervals, and to be able to create the necessary additional shocks. It is only possible to learn this in a school, that is to say, in a rightly organized school which follows the esoteric traditions. Without the help of a school, a man by himself can never understand the law of octaves, the points in the intervals, and the order of creating shocks. He cannot understand this because certain conditions are necessary for this purpose. And these conditions can only be created in a school which is itself created upon these principles. How a school is created on the principles of the law of octaves will be explained in due course. And this in turn will explain to you one aspect of the union of the law of 7 with the law of 3. In the meantime, it can be said that in school teaching, a man is given examples of both descending, creative, and ascending or evolutionary cosmic octaves. Western thought, knowing neither about octaves nor about the law of 3, confuses the ascending and the descending lines and does not understand that the line of evolution is opposed to the line of creation. That is to say, it goes against it, as though against the stream. In study of the law of octaves, it must be remembered that octaves in their relation to each other are divided into fundamental and subordinate. The fundamental octave can be likened to the trunk of a tree giving off branches of lateral octaves. The 7 fundamental notes of the octave and the 2 intervals, the bearers of direction, give altogether 9 links of a chain, 3 groups of 3 links each. The fundamental octaves are connected with the secondary or subordinate octaves in a certain definite way. Out of the subordinate octaves of the first order come the subordinate octaves of the second order, and so on. The construction of octaves can be compared to the construction of a tree. From the straight basic trunk, out there come boughs and on all sides, which divide in turn and pass into the branches, becoming smaller and smaller, and finally they are covered with leaves. The same process goes on to the construction of the leaves, in the formation of the veins, the serrations, and so on. Like everything in nature, the human body, which represents a certain whole, bears within and without the same correlations. According to the number of notes in the octave and its intervals, the human body has 9 basic measurements expressed by the numbers of a definite measure. In individuals, these numbers, of course, differ widely, but in certain definite limits. These 9 basic measurements, giving a full octave of the first order by combining a certain definite way, pass into measurable subordinate octaves, which gives rise in turn to other subordinate octaves, and so on. In this way, it is possible to obtain measurements of any member or part of the human body as they are all in a definite relationship to one another. The law of octaves naturally gives rise to a great many talks in our group and to much perplexity. Gurdjieff warned us all the time against too much theorizing. You must understand and feel this law in yourselves, he said. Only then will you see it outside of yourself. This, of course, is true, but the difficulty was not only in this. Merely a technical understanding of the law of octaves requires a lot of time, and we return to it continually, sometimes making unexpected discoveries, sometimes, again, losing what had seemed to us already established. It is now difficult to convey how at different periods, now one and now another idea became the center of gravity in our work, attracted the greatest attention, gave rise to most talks. The idea of the law of octaves became in its way a permanent center of gravity. We returned to it on every occasion. We spoke of it and discussed its various aspects at every meeting until we began gradually to think of everything from the point of view of this idea. In his first talk, Gurdjieff gave only a general outline of the idea and constantly returned to it himself, pointing out to us its different aspects and meanings. At one of the following meetings, he gave us a very interesting picture of another meaning of the law of octaves, which went deeply into things. In order to better understand the significance of the law of octaves, it is necessary to have a clear idea of another property of vibrations, the so-called inner vibrations. This means that within vibrations, other vibrations proceed, and that every octave can be resolved into a greater number of inner octaves. Each note of any octave can be regarded as an octave on another plane. Each note of these inner octaves, again, contains a whole octave, and so on, for some considerable way, but not ad infinitum, because there is a definite limit to the development of inner octaves. These inner vibrations proceed simultaneously in media of different density, interpenetrating one another. They are reflected in one another, give rise to one another, stop, impel, or change one another. Let us imagine vibrations in a substance or a medium of a certain definite density. Let us suppose as this substance or medium to consist of the comparatively coarse atoms of the world, 48 of which is, so to speak, an amalgamation of 48 primordial atoms. The vibrations which proceed in this medium are divisible into octaves, and the octaves are divisible into notes. Let us imagine that we have taken one octave of these vibrations for the purpose of some kind of investigation. We must realize that within the limits of this octave proceed the vibrations of still finer substance. The substance of world 48 is saturated with substance of world 24. The vibrations in substance world 24 stand in definite relation to the vibrations in the substance of world 48. Namely, each note of the vibrations in the substance of world 48 contains a whole octave of vibrations in the substance of world 24. These are inner octaves. The substance of world 24 is, in turn, permeated with the substance of world 12. In this substance also there are vibrations, and each note in the vibrations of world 24 contains a whole octave of the vibrations of world 12. The substance of world 12 is permeated with the substance of world 6. The substance of world 6 is permeated with substance of world 3. World 3 is permeated with the substance of world 1. Corresponding vibrations exist in each of these worlds, and the order remains always the same. Namely, each note of the vibration is a coarser substance, contains a whole octave of the vibrations of a finer substance. If we begin with vibrations of world 48, we can say that one note of vibration in this world contains an octave or 7 notes of the vibrations of the planetary world. Each note of the vibrations of the planetary world contains 7 notes of vibrations of the world of the sun. Each vibration of the world of the sun will contain 7 notes of the vibrations of the starry world, and so on. The study of inner octaves, the study of their relation to outer octaves, and the possible influence of the former upon the latter constitute a very important part of the study of the world and of man. At the next meeting, Gurdjieff spoke of the ray of creation, partly repeating and partly supplementing and developing what he had already said. The ray of creation, like every other process which is completed at a given moment, can be regarded as an octave. This would be a descending octave in which Do passes into Si, Si into Law, and so on. The absolute, or all, world 1, will be Do. All worlds, world 3, Si. All suns, world 6, Law. Our sun, world 12, Sol. All planets, world 24, Fa. The earth, world 48, Me. The moon, world 96. The ray of creation begins with the absolute. The absolute is all. It is Do. The ray of creation ends in the moon. Beyond the moon there is nothing. This is also the absolute, Do. In examining the ray of creation, or cosmic octave, we see that intervals should come in the development of this octave. The first between Do and Si, that is between world 1 and world 3, between the absolute and all worlds, and the second between Fa and Me, that is between world 24 and 48, between all planets and the earth. But the first interval is filled by the will of the absolute. One of the manifestations of the will of the absolute consists precisely in the filling of this interval by means of a conscious manifestation of neutralizing force, which fills up the interval between the active and passive forces. With the second interval, the situation is more complicated. Something is missing between the planets and the earth. Planetary influences cannot pass to the earth consecutively and fully. An additional shock is indispensable. The creation of some new conditions to ensure proper passage of forces is indispensable. The conditions to ensure the passage of forces are created by this arrangement of a special mechanical contrivance between the planets and the earth. This mechanical contrivance, this transmitting station of forces, is organic life on Earth. Organic life on Earth was created to fill the interval between the planets and the Earth. Organic life represents, so to speak, the Earth's organ of perception. Organic life forms something like a sensitive film which covers the whole of the Earth's globe and takes in those influences coming from the planetary sphere which otherwise would not be able to reach the Earth. The vegetable, animal, and human kingdoms are equally important for the Earth in this respect. A field merely covered with grass takes in a planetary influence or a definite kind and transmits them to the Earth. The same field with a crowd of people on it will take in and transmit other influences. The population of Europe takes on one kind of planetary influence and transmits them to the Earth. The population of Africa takes in planetary influences of another kind, and so on. All great events in the life of human masses are caused by planetary influences. They are the result of the taking in of planetary influences. Human society is a highly sensitive mass for the reception of planetary influences, and any accidental small tension in planetary spheres can be reflected for years in an increased animation in one or another sphere of human activity. Something accidental and very transient takes place in planetary space. This is immediately received by the human masses, and people begin to hate and kill one another, justifying their actions by some theory of brotherhood or equality or love or justice. Organic life is the organ of perception of the earth and is at the same time an organ of radiation. With the help of organic life, each portion of the earth's surface occupying a given area sends every moment certain kinds of rays into the direction of the sun, the planets, and the moon. The connection with this, the sun needs one kind of radiations, the planets another kind, and the moon another. Everything that happens on Earth creates radiations of this kind, and many things often happen just because certain kinds of radiation are required from a certain place on the Earth's surface. In saying this, Gurdjieff drew our attention in particular to the nonconformity of time, that is, of the duration of events in planetary world and in human life. The significance of his insistence on this point became clear to me only later. At the same time, he constantly emphasized that the fact that no matter what took place in the thin film of organic life, it always served the interests of the earth, the sun, the planets, and the moon. Nothing unnecessary and nothing independent could happen in it because it was created for a definite purpose and was merely subordinate. And once dwelling on this theme, he gave us a diagram of the structures of the octave in which one of the links was the organic life on Earth. This additional or lateral octave in the ray of creation begins with the sun, he said. The sun, Sol of the cosmic octave, begins at the certain moment as a sound as do, Sol, do. So it is necessary to realize that at every note of any octave, in the present instance, every note of the cosmic octave may represent do, and at some other lateral octave issuing from it. Or it would be still more exact to say that any note of any octave may at the same time be any note of any other octave passing through it. In the present instance, Sol begins to sound as do. Descending to the level of the planets, this new octave passes into C. Descending still lower, it produces three notes, La, Sol, Fa, which create and constitute organic life on the earth in the form that we know. It, me, of this octave blends with me of the cosmic octave, that is, with the earth, and ray of the cosmic octave, that is, with the moon. We at once felt that there was a great deal of meaning in this lateral octave. First of all, it showed that organic life, represented by the diagram by three notes, had two higher notes, one on the level of the planets and one on the level of the sun, and that it began in the sun. This last was the most important point because once more, as with many other things that in Gurdjieff's system, it contradicted the usual modern idea of life having originated, so to speak, from below. In his explanations, life came from above. Then much talk rose about the notes mi, re, and of the lateral octave. We could not, of course, define what re was, but it was clearly connected with the idea of food for the moon. Some product of the disintegration of organic life went to the moon. This must be re. In regard to me, it was possible to speak quite definitely. Organic life undoubtedly disappeared in the earth. The role of organic life in the structure of the earth's surface was indisputable. There was the growth of coral islands and limestone mountains and formation of coal seams and accumulations of petroleum, the alterations of the soil under the influence of vegetation, the growth of vegetation in lakes, the formation of rich arable lands by worms, change of climate due to the draining of swamps and the destruction of forests, and many other things that we know of and do not know of. But in addition to this, the lateral octave showed with particular clarity how easily and correctly things were classified in the system we were studying. Everything anomalous, unexpected, and accidental disappeared, and an immense and strictly thought-out plan of the universe began to make its appearance. I hope you enjoyed this Ouspensky reading from chapter 7, In Search of the Miraculous. I'm Roach, Mark Roach, wishing you all the best.